Hello, I'm David DeCosmo. Welcome to ECTV Live. I'm joined by my co-host, Rusty Fender. Rusty, welcome.
Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year to you as well.
We always start the New Year off with
little
the worst head cold in history.
It's traditional.
It is traditional.
You have to maintain tradition. As 2018 begins, of course, the first holiday of the new year is the holiday in honor of the late Dr. Martin Luther King. And Kathy Hardaway represents the Martin Luther King Committee here in our area, and there's always activities planned around that holiday. Yes. And Kathy, this year's no exception. You've got a full slate of activities beginning not on the holiday itself, but rather on the Saturday preceding. Obviously, Martin Luther King Day is always on a Monday.
And it falls on the Monday this day, so people will actually celebrate on the day.
Right, correct. Which would be the 15th.
Yes, January the 15th.
But you're beginning your remembrance, your celebration, as it were, on the 13th.
Right.
So what's lined up for this year's commemoration of Dr. Martin Luther King?
Well, we call it the weekend of activities in honor of Martin Luther King. So we do start on Saturday, and our focus on Saturday tends to be youth. And this year, we've actually added another dimension. We're going to use the Steamtown Mall as a venue on Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4. And our speaker for Sunday has volunteered his time to be a part of that. And at the Steamtown Mall, we're going to have a mural time, and also students from United Neighborhood Center's photography group come and participate in that. Our speaker this year is a gentleman by the name of Bayate Ross Smith out of New York City. He is a multimedia artist, uses print, uses photography in his art, and we're going to use photography this year to highlight Bayate.
Now, how does photography fit in with the meshing of youth and the remembrance of Dr. King?
I said that intentionally, so you'd ask that question there, Dave. And I suggest you look up Bayate Ross Smith, to look at some of his work. He has a TED Talk, he's on YouTube. But one of the interesting things he does, and it's a real thing every day, how you present yourself matters, meaning the suit that I put on was picked for this today. I knew I was going to be here, and I purposefully, you pick out outfits for, as a woman does, or the hair, you know, right. Yes. And so Bayate looked at taking the same person and putting different outfits on them, hats, scarves, hair, wigs, and seeing how they would be perceived. The same person, how they're perceived depending on their look.
Same person, but in different attire, so that, for instance, were I sitting here with fishing gear on, how would they perceive me? Were I to sit here in, dressed in some sort of Western outfit?
Yes.
And it could be the same person. Obviously, the place you would see this most often would be with an actor. So an actor playing various roles would obviously have various costumes.
Typecasting.
Correct.
Sure,
yeah.
sure,
right.
Sure.
But people of color, many times, and people, period, have different styles that they wear. And at the Steamtown Mall, we're going to have props. We're going to have clothing, hair pieces, and take pictures, and maybe 4 or 5 pictures of the same person, and have a discussion on the perception. And the perception goes both ways. I dress a certain way because I want to be perceived a certain way, respected in a certain way. And then you look at me, and then your perception counts. And so it's going to be interesting to hear. And this is open to the public. There's no charge. And we want people of all ages to be involved in the discussion and what it means.
Yeah, the discussion is going to be the key point.
Yes.
The change of attire will be the fun thing. And, of course, the photography, I can see where the students will be taking some of those photos. But it's the discussion that's going to really air things out.
Yes. And I hope it allows our youth to say, how do I want to be perceived? Because sometimes they may be in the latest style, but is that the best style when you go for a job interview in a certain industry? And then also it may look at the adult saying, you know what, the hair, many African Americans will wear weaves or wear braids, and how do I perceive that? How do I accept that as the person maybe on the other side doing the interview? Should that matter? And I hope even the adults will look at their perceptions due to how people are dressed or the hair.
Now, I wonder if the perception changes with regard to whether it is a person of color looking at the person in the attire, or is there any science on that? Has he gone into that in some of his other presentations?
Well, I know there's been research on people understanding people that look like themselves, particularly when it comes to identifying. And I know there are times when someone will say, are you, and I've done it myself, and there are times when people of color aren't distinguished by maybe white people as they should. And there are clearly studies and research done on how you recognize people within your own ethnicity and those that you're familiar with.
You know, Dr. King would love something like this.
Yeah.
I think he would.
Yeah.
Well, it's an experiment, but especially when it's designed for the youth.
Correct.
Where they can look at something that maybe they never even really thought about looking at in that fashion.
Right. And that's our goal, just to get people thinking and discussing, so that though this is just a weekend, that I hope this would affect your perceptions going beyond the weekend of January.
Sure. Now that'll be at the Steamtown Mall, well, the mall marketplace at Steamtown now, of course, and that is from
2 p.m. to 4 p.m.
2
on
until
Saturday.
4. But you have some additional things going on according to your schedule here from 6 until 8. Let's get into that for just a second.
The Everyday Hero Contest, we've probably done this for about the last 6 or 7 years. We work with students from the Scranton School District, and their teachers will give them assignment of writing about your everyday hero. Your everyday hero many times is a teacher, maybe your grandfather, maybe your pastor that affected your life. And I will tell you, when I listen to these stories, I well up. It is touching to hear someone talk about a teacher that made a difference in their life. And I'm not going to quote it, but Maya Angelou has a saying that people will forget what you do for them. People will forget many times what you say, but people rarely forget how you make them feel. And Everyday Heroes is clearly about that, because we have a student talking about a teacher that made a difference in their life. Not only taking the time, but how they lifted them up. And all of us in our daily lives, everyday people, you have the opportunity, you can tear people down or you can lift them up. And an everyday hero is someone that lifts up.
Boy, how very true. I know when I started in broadcasting, 200 years ago, seems like that. Literally speaking, there were two people in the business that just encouraged me so much, and I will never forget them. They didn't have to do that; they were already established.
Exactly.
But they took the time to deal with a young person then. And, and there are certain people in your life that just you have that fallback connection with. I'm sure you have them as well.
And it's rare, especially in that business, because they expect when you come in that you're ready to roll. And a lot of folks who've been established in the business, as Dave knows, don't want to take the time to mentor you. So you either make it or break it. And there's that rare person who will say, don't speak a sentence and raise your voice at the end, but make it go down in broadcasting. That's how we read news. And you never forget those people.
No.
It's true, the smallest things.
And those are the everyday heroes. And we have primarily intermediate students that are at the intermediate school talking about their dad who may work 2 jobs so they can participate in activities at school. And it is wonderful to hear the kids recognize that when they're 10, 11, 12 years old. And we give them awards and they're recognized, but to hear those stories is the good way to begin our weekend.
Sure, and they always have those thoughts within them, but unless they're asked about them, they don't necessarily express them.
Yes.
So this is a chance, and this is a written essay that they do.
Yes, that they've already presented, and out of that class they've been selected.
Okay.
And we'll probably have about 30 kids between the intermediate schools within the Scranton School District. And to bring people out, we always follow by food. And we'll have a multicultural meal. And it's supposed to be just little tastings, but it's a meal, and from different nationalities. Some that we've had Bhutanese food there. Many times the African American community is recognized, the Russian community, and it is great. Italians are there in full force, but there is just a smorgasbord of food to choose from.
So
at
nice
that event.
exposure to the various cultural
It is.
Dishes in that case.
Yes, yes. And that we've done that for the few years, and it's interesting the people that want to represent themselves. My contribution this year is Welsh cookies.
Ah.
I am 50% Welsh. My mom was born and raised in Blakely, and she's Gwendolyn Jones. And people don't know that much about me when they see me talking about perceptions, but I'm 50% Welsh. And instead of bringing African American food this year, I'm making my mom's recipe of Welsh cookies.
Welsh cookies.
Yes.
Well, I'm married to a young lady who happens to love those, so if there's any left over, feel free to pass them,
I
pass
doubt
them
it.
along.
There's rarely any Welsh cookies left over.
I suppose that's probably the case. Now the Everyday Hero, that is 6 till 8. Where is that taking place?
That's at the Scranton High School.
Can anyone just come and
It is
take
open
part
to
in
the
that?
public. Yes, it is open to the public. Free of
Okay.
charge, no charge.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
Before we move on,
Sure.
you have done that before.
We have.
And I'm kind of wondering about the reaction that you get to. Do you get a good turnout for something like that?
We do. And many times it's families of those children that are speaking, and then of course those that they recognize. In between that, and I failed to mention, we have somewhat of a mini talent show. We invite area choirs primarily from different churches. We have had dancers there, and so to break up some of the essays, we have talent. And so when I say, if we may have 125 to 200 people there any given year, free and open to the public. And I will tell you, our events primarily are free. We have one dinner on Sunday that there's a cost to, but Martin Luther King, we want people to share in the events.
You want them to be able to come and to open, and that
Yes.
again would go along with his philosophy of things, everything open to everybody.
Exactly.
Well, we'll get into Sunday now, though, and that begins in the afternoon.
It does.
So let's talk about that. Now, there is, as you say, there's one admission involved in this, but
Yes.
that's all right. Let's talk about it. And
We call this our celebration dinner of Martin Luther King, and also our awards dinner. And this is from 2:30 to 5:30 at the University of Scranton, who has been a gracious sponsor of many of the things with Martin Luther King on this Sunday. There is a $25 ticket charge for that, and you can go to our website, Greater Scranton Martin Luther King Commission, for information so far as that's concerned. We have two speakers for that evening. One, we attempt to have a national speaker and then a local speaker.
Okay.
Our national speaker this year will be a gentleman by the name of Bayate Ross Smith. He's out of New York City. He is an artist, which I mentioned before. He's participating on Saturday. He will talk about the perception, and he will share, going across the country, what he's seen in different areas.
I was going to ask whether he did that in other areas, because a project like that, and again, we talked earlier about identifying people or perceiving people differently depending on dress and attire and hair and everything else. That's one thing to look at in a New York City atmosphere.
Right.
That's such a blended community. But then you get into other areas that are not all that blended, and it's probably a lot more of a shock value.
Exactly.
In some cases.
And I hope to hear some of what he's done in the past on Sunday, but then I hope he talks about what happened at the marketplace, the Steamtown Mall, on
Yes.
Saturday locally. And this should be his introduction to our area. I hope to see him maybe at some of our educational institutions in the future doing additional work. But Bayate is the main speaker there, but we also have Andy Mahalchik. And he's our local speaker, and Andy has done some work on race relations locally, and we hope to hear Andy so far as that's concerned. Each year we look at different segments of the population. We've looked at education, we looked at law enforcement. This year it's media, be it the art media, be it the spoken word. And those two gentlemen, we're looking forward to what they have to say and contribute to Martin Luther King holiday.
Well, we talked a little bit before we went on the air about the media perception, and
Yes.
the media. Wow, talk about a completely different direction. You know, I think back to when Walter Cronkite was the most respected man and most trusted man in America, and now just coming to do this program today, I'm hearing chatter on one of our local talk stations about, well, can you trust this one or can you trust that one? And this one's got such an agenda and that one's got such an agenda.
I think we have the fake news, biased news hook brought into the vernacular now, and I think that if the seed wasn't already in your mind about fake news, I think it's been planted.
Oh, absolutely planted now.
Yeah. And we find ourselves, in just among my own friends, they'll say something, and it's news, they heard it somewhere, but you'll doubt what they say and say, where'd you hear that? What channel was it?
Yes, yeah.
Because depending on the channel,
true.
there's a twist many times to that same news
There's
story.
a difference between Fox News, there's a difference between MSNBC and CNN, and there's no doubt about it.
Right.
And they do have a favorite, a flavor of the week, who they go along with. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
So fake news, maybe.
And I have to tell you that I got into news probably in 1965 because I started as a disc jockey in radio.
Okay.
But from 1965 until 2009, when I stepped out of the regular news beat, covered news every single day, I never once had any person above me at any level at the stations I worked at direct me as to how I was to do a story or how I was to write a story or how I was to tell a story.
The news involved the facts.
Yeah, now,
Bottom line.
granted, that's at a regional level.
Right.
So, you know, I can't attest for something I don't know about above that.
Right.
But I know some people who have been, you know, national broadcasters. Pardon me, Brian Carey, who was actually a student of mine when I taught at King's College and went on to work for CBS in New York too. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm sure that he never was influenced or told to do something in a certain way.
Right.
So whether that's happening somewhere, it's news to me.
I agree.
Right.
It's news to me, too,
Right.
if they actually come into a meeting and say, well, we're going to slant this this way to make Trump's decision look better.
Right.
That's news to me if they actually do that.
Yeah. But I will tell you, I think overall people have lost confidence in what they hear.
Yes, I
And
agree.
as a result, we thought, well, let's talk about that a little bit and talk about that in our community, talk about that as people of color and how that's affected us.
Okay.
Being we're talking national, how do you think, it's been a long time since Dr. King's reign, how do you think he'd grade the awareness of civil rights now since 1968? You know, 2 years ago, Barbara and I went to the Lorraine Motel, Memphis. We stayed in Arkansas, went to Hot Springs National Park, and of course had to go to Central High,
Right.
the Little Rock Nine.
Exactly.
Now the F.W. Woolworth Counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, one of the most sought after, another civil rights museum. They're all civil rights museums. We've come a long way, and there's a long way to go. But how do you think he'd grade the overall awareness since 1968?
Unfortunately, I think our young people aren't aware and have forgotten.
Is that a fact?
I do. And we talk about this all the time at the Martin Luther King Commission. What should be some of our mission, our goals, the things that we work on outside of the weekend? And every now and then people will come to us and say, you know, my daughter was harassed, or they were going down the street and things were hollered outside, you know, to different people of color. And unfortunately, though we have laws in place so far as housing and job opportunity, I don't think our relations among people and understanding and sensitivity is where it needs to be. Personally, I think we've gone backward in our sensitivities to culture.
I would be very curious as to how were he still alive, how he would react to the NFL situation, the controversy of the players kneeling before the national anthem as a protest to those of color being mistreated by police here or there. and they're using that as the vehicle, which has probably caused more problems than it's caused answers.
Right, and that's a prime example. When you saw those players kneeling, they were doing it because of what they perceived as police, and not even perception, what they saw as police
Yes.
brutality, and wanting to say, this is a way that I can take a stand. And then they were called unpatriotic and un-American as a result of that. And I will tell you, some of us just shook our heads and saw how that was twisted. Those men are patriotic. They are American. They were taking a stand. Martin Luther King used to march to take a stand. They were kneeling. And I will tell you, personally, kneeling is a real humble place to be in. I mean, I kneeled to pray, and all of a sudden, kneeling was a bad thing to do. So people's perception and how that was twisted within the particular African American community was phenomenal to us and extremely eye-opening. How one person coming out to say, that's unpatriotic, fire them all, was stunning to us as a community.
You know, it's amazing too, though, that you see now the snowball effect of the folks in the intermediate zone being affected. The lowest NFL ratings now in the history of televised sports. That is biblical. That's how incredible. So everybody takes a hit from something that they have nothing to do with.
You know, but it all reminds us that the efforts of Dr. Martin Luther King are certainly worth remembering and exploring in various ways now, and you can draw your own conclusions as to how your reaction ought to be to these various things.
Right. We can talk about Monday. How about
Monday,
going to the actual day?
Yep. This is the actual holiday, Monday, January 15th, and you begin at 10 a.m.
We do. And let me tell you, the Greatest Good and the MLK Commission are a group of different organizations, such as United Neighborhood Centers, such as Friends of the Poor, Penn State Worthington, University of Scranton, the African American churches, have all come together over the years. And much of Monday, as a result of things that have gone down in this community for decades, so far as Martin Luther King, and we've formalized it and organized it. But the first thing in the morning, Friends of the Poor, and I will tell you, I participated in events with Friends of the Poor, as we know, with Sister Adrienne Barron on Martin Luther King Day. Now Sister Ann Walsh continues, and her name is on our contact list still, even though she's, yes. And on that day, there is registration required for children ages 5 to 12. And the neat thing, and this is the second year Friends of the Poor are taking their youth to the police barracks. And that's located at 100 South Washington Avenue. And they spend the day with some of our law enforcement and have lunch.
That is really great.
That is huge. Yeah. I am helping co-parenting, I call it, a 5-year-old grandson. His name is Micah. And we were over here at the marketplace. And Micah has participated in some of these events. And Chief Graziano has done such an excellent job getting the Scranton police out in the community to different events. They were at an event at Bethel AME Church this summer, and Micah was there. And along with face painting, he also got a chance to talk to some of the Scranton police. We were at the marketplace in Steamtown. Micah saw a police officer and said, "Hey!" And I didn't know he was talking to, and I think the officer was surprised too. But a 5-year-old African-American boy greeting a police officer like that was a direct result of the work done by Chief Graziano with the community police going out. And I was so impressed with that.
Yeah, you can't beat that in the way of involvement.
Not at all. Yeah. And Sister Ann, Friends of the Poor, continue that with her youth on Monday. Also, Dr. Marwan Wafa is new to the area. He's the chancellor at Penn State Worthington. And Dr. Wafa immediately got involved in the Martin Luther King Commission. And he's having a lunch at the Worthington campus. You have to RSVP because he's going to feed you, but it's free of charge. Oh. And he's having another fairly new member to the community, Mrs. Latita Smith. Latita is the president and CEO of the Moses Taylor Foundation. Latita is an African-American woman from Cleveland, Ohio, and has come to this area, lives in South Abington Township, has embraced our area. She's raising 2 young children in the area, and Latita is going to speak, and it will be inspirational. So please consider coming to Penn State Worthington campus. And Dr. Walfa has a whole program planned from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m.
Okay.
And from Penn State Worthington, we go right to Progressive Center for a march. And the march, we start at Progressive Center on Olive Street and march down to the courthouse on North Washington. And we try singing, sometimes we sing some of the march songs that Martin Luther King, we'll see how the weather is. I think the weather has something to do
Absolutely, yeah.
with the crowd.
And of course, the marches, talk about a tie to Dr. King, as you said earlier, that was his thing. He marched to demonstrate, and so you march to remember, you march to hopefully rekindle some of the ideals that he supported.
Yes. And when we get to the courthouse, this is an opportunity where we invite some of the local dignitaries. We've had the county commissioners, some of the Court of Common Pleas judges, some of our state representatives come and speak concerning Martin Luther King at the end of that march. Okay. And then graciously, the Friends of the Poor, as we're walking back to our vehicles at Progressive Center, we stop at the Cultural Center for hot cocoa and cookies, which is always a nice treat.
Yeah, appropriate in January, certainly.
Definitely. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, all day long, the United Neighborhood Centers at their Angels Attic is collecting non-perishable foods. And they're working with participants in ARC to pack it and to give bags to needy families, bags of foods to needy families in the community.
It's so great to see such a packed calendar from Saturday through Monday for Martin Luther King Day and all those events.
Yeah, to have it culminate on the day this year, on the date. This year.
Exactly.
We're just about out of time. One quick reminder to people, if you will, as to where they can get information on all of the activities.
Sure, we have a website, and we're called the Greater Scranton Martin Luther King Commission. So our website is GS for Greater Scranton, MLK Commission at gmail.com. GSMLK Commission at gmail.com. And I have to mention the last thing, Dave.
Go ahead.
Because Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist preacher. So, of course, the grand finale of our whole celebration is an interfaith service. This year will be held at Salvation Apostolic Church, and that's at 223 North Main Avenue in West Scranton.
And that will wrap up the activities.
And we
Kathy
have a
Hardaway,
community choir and all.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Kathy.
I encourage you folks to check into all these activities. They're well planned. Most of it is free. And if you're in a different area other than Scranton, check around. You'll probably find some Martin Luther King related activities in your area as well. Rusty Fender, thanks for joining me.
See you next week, partner.
Indeed. Mark McGlory, thanks for keeping us in focus. I'm David DeCosmo for ECTV Live. Till we see you again next week, here's hoping all your news is good.